John Elway is, by acclamation, one of the greatest players in NFL history. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer, threw for over 51,000 yards, 300 touchdowns, made 9 Pro Bowls, won 2 Super Bowls, a Super Bowl MVP, and appeared in 5 Super Bowls overall. Unlike some other all-time great quarterbacks, people expected greatness from Elway straight from day one, as he was the most hyped prospect coming out of college maybe ever. After he famously demanded a trade from the Baltimore Colts, who took him with the first overall pick in 1983, he landed in Denver, where he made his home on the field for the next 16 seasons. But despite all of his achievements, Elway remains a somewhat controversial figure in quarterback debates due to his relatively lackluster numbers and efficiency. That's really the biggest reason why I decided to make this video about him, to figure out whether or not John Elway is really as great as the old heads say he is, or whether he's just overrated like the stats say. Without further ado, let's begin.
Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Their team of gourmet chefs create each meal using only ingredients with integrity to help you feel your best all day long. Eat stress-free this summer with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Also, discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. So what are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. When things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order up every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, or pause or reschedule your deliveries anytime. I've said it in all the other ads that I've done for Factor, and it's 1000% true. They are the real deal. They have my complete and total endorsement, so if you're on the fence about it, you shouldn't be. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50berry to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50berry at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
Elway's rookie season was, in a word, horrible. He completed fewer than half his passes, had just 7 touchdowns to 14 interceptions for a putrid 54.9 passer rating and 3.33 adjusted net yards per attempt. He was the lowest rated passer in the league in terms of adjusted net yards per attempt, and he was also benched multiple times for backup Steve DeBerg and Gary Kubiak. Elway's career debut saw him post a 0.0 passer rating versus the Steelers, but he was still credited with the win thanks to DeBerg's work. In Elway's first 5 starts specifically, he had a passer rating of 40.2 and just 1 touchdown to 5 interceptions as the Broncos were sitting at 2-3. Head coach Dan Reeves then sat Elway for the next 5 games until Elway saw mop-up action versus Seattle in Week 10 and played well, which gave him the starting spot back, but he would again struggle over the next 2 games. It wasn't until December that Elway would show the promise that made him so hyped out of Stanford. In back-to-back games versus the Browns and the Colts, he combined for 5 touchdowns and averaged 9.3 yards per attempt, winning both games. However, as was the case in his rocky rookie year, he struggled mightily in the season finale versus Kansas City, throwing 4 interceptions. Despite the Broncos being just 4-7 in the 11 games Elway appeared in, they made the playoffs at 9-7, and Elway was once again benched by Reeves for DeBerg. Despite not starting, Elway would see action in his playoff debut versus Seattle, but it was in garbage time as the Broncos got destroyed 31-7, ending their season. The Golden Boy was looking a lot more like fool's gold. The 1984 season saw a change in fortune for both Elway individually and the Broncos as a team. Although nobody would confuse Elway's season for Dan Marino's legendary year, he did show a marked improvement over his disaster rookie season. Let's start with the good. Elway threw for 18 touchdown passes, which was not a bad mark for a young quarterback in 1984. Just don't look at Dan Marino's numbers. His passer rating improved over 20 points from 54.9 to 76.8, and it would have been over 80 if you removed 3 Hail Mary interceptions that he had. Elway had a 5-game span in the middle of the year where he had 4 games over a 100 passer rating, including what was the best statistical game of his career versus the Vikings, where he threw for 5 touchdowns and a stellar 154.1 rating in a 42-21 win. Most importantly, these performances were resulting in wins, as the Broncos went 13-3 and earned a first-round bye, although that could also be attributed to their second-ranked defense under legendary defensive coordinator Joe Collier. Now, for the bad. It is true Elway improved a lot from his rookie year, but the bar was literally in hell. In the grand scheme of things, Elway's numbers were still relatively average in terms of efficiency. Get ready, this will be a common theme you'll hear over again again and again as the video progresses. He was 14th in completion percentage, 12th in touchdown percentage, 17th in interception percentage and passer rating, and 12th in net yards per attempt, and 15th in adjusted net yards per attempt. The Broncos were also outgained by over 750 yards in the regular season, suggesting their record was largely due to turnover luck, which it was. Denver forced 55 turnovers, 21 more than their opponents, but this would not carry over to the playoffs. In Elway's first career playoff start, he faced the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team barely hanging on to the glory of days past. The game began with a missed field goal by Denver kicker Rich Carlis before Elway got Denver a 7-0 lead on a touchdown pass. The Steelers would cut the lead to 7-3, and then Elway threw a crucial and terrible red zone interception, and after a sequence of more sloppy play by both teams, the Steelers eventually took a 10-7 lead on a touchdown run. Denver missed another field goal, but a block punt set them up with elite field position with a chance to potentially take a lead, but they could only muster a field goal to tie the game at 10. Elway then threw an absolute rocket for a touchdown to give Denver a 17-10 lead in the third, before Tom Selleck lookalike Mark Malone found Lewis Lips for a Pittsburgh touchdown to make it 17-17 entering the fourth. Pittsburgh missed a chip shot field goal, but Denver could not capitalize again as Elway threw another terrible interception deep in Denver territory, which led to a 2-yard touchdown run by Pittsburgh to go up 24-17. Denver would get a couple more chances to tie the game, but their efforts were in vain, as their season of success ended prematurely, robbing us of a Marino Elway AFC Championship game in Miami. Those goddamn Steelers are always ruining everything! If people were expecting John Elway to finally emerge as a superstar heading into the 1985 season, they would end up being sadly mistaken. The story of Elway's 1985 season is quantity over quality. He did set new career highs to that point in every category, both good and bad, throwing for nearly 3,900 yards and 22 touchdowns. But he also averaged just 6.4 yards per attempt and threw a career high 23 interceptions for a putrid 70.9 rating. Elway led the league in pass attempts, which goes against the narrative that Dan Reeves did not let him throw the ball until the team was losing late in games. Elway's efficiency rankings were nightmarish: 16th in completion percentage, 22nd in touchdown percentage, 13th in interception percentage, 22nd in yards per attempt, and 18th in both net yards per attempt and adjusted net yards per attempt. Elway started the season throwing 12 touchdowns in the first 5 games before cooling off to throw just 10 touchdowns to 15 interceptions over the last 11 games combined. This gets at the heart of the Elway dilemma. Despite his lackluster stats, the Broncos most often won games that he started, so he had to have been doing something the stats didn't capture, right? The highlight of the season was a Monday Night Football win over the defending champion 49ers, in which the Broncos got some assistance from the fans in the form of snowballs on a 49ers game-winning field goal attempt. Also, this was the only season in Elway's first 15 years that he faced Dan Marino, a game in which Miami won 30-26 at Mile High. Seriously, how the hell does that happen, NFL? It's not like they weren't in different conferences. Only playing one team in conference over 15 seasons, especially when they're both Hall of Fame quarterbacks, inexcusable. The Broncos finished a very respectable 11-5, a slight step back from 13-3, but 99.9% of the time it's good enough to make the playoffs or even get a first-round bye. Well, this was the 0.1% of the time that it wasn't good enough. The only other team to experience this feeling of rejection is the 2008 New England Patriots. Denver started out 9-3, but what really did them in was 2 late-season losses to the Raiders, both by 3 points. The Broncos would respond to win their last 2 games to get to 11 wins, but it was too late. They lost out on a tiebreaker with the Patriots based on common opponent's record. I actually like divisions, and I feel that doing away with them would really hurt the sport of football, much like it's hurt the NBA. Division games matter, and they have a certain greater feeling to them, but it still does not make sense to me that the 8-8 Cleveland Browns got a first-round bye because they won their division, while the 11-5 Broncos did not make the playoffs at all. Ironically, if you swapped out the Broncos for the Browns, we would have gotten a Marino Elway playoff matchup, I think, because Marino is who the Browns played in their first playoff game. Regardless, 3 seasons into his much-hyped career, Elway had some great highlights and flashes of greatness, but his numbers were still markedly mediocre, and most importantly, he still had 0 playoff wins. Whenever I do an in-depth quarterback career video, you'll notice that at the beginning of each season, I always show a screenshot of the team and how they did that year, as well as the head coach and the coordinators. In the case of John Elway, this is important because heading into 1986, a man named Mike Shanahan was promoted to offensive coordinator. We all know Shanahan for his later tenure as Denver's head coach, where he won multiple Super Bowls, spoiler, and his legacy being continued on today with his son Kyle. But I don't think it's a coincidence that all of Elway's best seasons came with Shanahan either as offensive coordinator or head coach. That's why it should be no surprise that 1986 was Elway's most efficient season yet, although his raw numbers were still nothing historic. He finished 14th in completion percentage, 13th in touchdown percentage, a very nice 4th in interception percentage, 11th in passer rating, 14th in net yards per attempt, and 10th in adjusted net yards per attempt. He also finished 5th in MVP voting and Offensive Player of the Year voting, perhaps overrating him a bit, although Denver's defense was nothing special, being ranked just 15th in points allowed. The Broncos started the season 8-1 with Elway putting up very good numbers of 13 touchdowns to 4 interceptions with a 90.4 rating. However, over the last 7 games of the season, Elway and the team would revert back to some bad habits. He threw just 6 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, nice, for a 67.9 rating, and the team went 3-4 overall to finish 11-5 for the second year in a row. It wasn't just that they lost 4 of their last 7 games, it was how they lost them. Outside of a hard-fought battle versus the eventual Super Bowl champion Giants, there was a brutal 9-3 defeat versus the Chargers, a 27-point loss to rival Kansas City, and a 25-point loss in the season finale versus Seattle. It was safe to say heading into the 1986 playoffs that Denver and Elway were nobody's choice to make it out of the AFC, but they did win the AFC West to secure a first-round bye and a home matchup versus the defending AFC champion Patriots at Mile High in the divisional round. It wasn't Elway's best performance as he threw 2 interceptions, but he also had a nice long touchdown run and an incredible touchdown pass late in the third quarter to give Denver a 20-17 lead entering the fourth. The fourth quarter saw no scores except for a Denver safety on New England quarterback Tony Eason to reach the final score of 22-17, giving Elway his first playoff win and AFC Championship game appearance versus the Cleveland Browns, a game which everybody remembers. Let's skip past the early shit and get right to the part you all remember. Cleveland quarterback Bernie Kosar threw what looked to be a game-winning touchdown pass to put Cleveland up 20-13 with about 5 minutes left in the game, and Denver botched the next kickoff, starting Elway at the Denver 2-yard line where he put together the drive. Now, here's the thing about the drive. It was a great touchdown drive, no doubt about it. But based on how famous it is, you would think it won Denver the game, but no. In fact, all it did was tie the game and send it into overtime, where Cleveland even had the ball first with a chance to win, but they had to punt. Elway then made a couple more great plays in overtime to set up Rich Karlis with the game-winning field goal, which in and of itself looked to be debatable, but nevertheless, Elway had pushed Denver to Super Bowl 21 versus the powerhouse New York Giants. Spoiler alert, it did not end well for Elway, but it didn't start out that badly. In fact, Denver had a 3-0 lead and responded to a Giants touchdown pass with an early Elway touchdown run to go up 10-7 after the first quarter. Then things started to break down. Denver had the ball with a chance to go up 10 deep in Giants territory, but they got stuffed and had to settle for a 23-yard field goal attempt, which Karlis whiffed on. Elway got sacked for a safety to make it 10-9, but he would once again respond with a good drive to set up what should have been another easy 34-yard field goal for Karlis. But once again, Karlis and his stupid-ass barefoot missed the kick. Instead of being up 16-9 or even 20-9, Denver soon found itself losing 16-10 following another Giants touchdown pass from Phil Simms to Mark Bavaro. Then the bottom fell out. The Giants went up 19-10 on a field goal and then made it 26-10 entering the fourth following a Joe Morris touchdown run. Elway started the fourth by throwing an interception, which Simms capitalized on with his third touchdown pass of the day to make it 33-10. Then Dan Reeves heroically settled for a 28-yard field goal down 23 to make it 33-13 with 6:24 left. The Giants scored another touchdown to make it 39-13 before Elway stat padded a bit with a rocket touchdown pass to reach the final score of 39-20. Elway really wasn't that bad in his first Super Bowl appearance. Not great, but not terrible. And although losing by 19 on the biggest stage in the sport seems like the worst thing imaginable, Denver and Elway would quickly find out in the near future that it can indeed get worse. Much worse. When it comes to John Elway, there are a lot of debates, but the one thing that's really not debatable is that 1987 is the best individual season he ever had with Dan Reeves as his head coach. The 87 season overall for the league was a tumultuous one. The players went on strike for 4 games, which led to most star players appearing in just 12 games instead of the usual 16, and Elway was one of them. All teams played 15 games, and in Elway's 12 starts, the Broncos went 8-3-1. Elway's individual honors list was long. He made the Pro Bowl, was named second team All-Pro, and finished third in Offensive Player of the Year voting. And, oh yeah, he was also named Associated Press MVP, despite, as previously mentioned, not being first team All-Pro. This was the last time this happened until just this year with Lamar Jackson and Josh
Allen. However, unlike in 2024, there was a reason for it, as both the 49ers' Joe Montana and Jerry Rice had stellar years and took votes away from each other just enough to give Elway the nod, even though Montana was first-team All-Pro. Elway's raw volume stats were not great, but his efficiency was the best it had ever been to this point in his career. He threw just 19 touchdowns to 12 interceptions and finished 18th in completion percentage, 13th in touchdown percentage, 7th in interception percentage, 3rd in yards per attempt, 11th in passer rating, which all put together is nothing special. But he did lead the league in net yards per attempt and finished a stellar 4th in adjusted net yards per attempt, and he also ran for over 300 yards in just 12 games. Denver went just 2-2-1 in his first 5 starts, and including the strike games from early in the season, we're sitting at just 4-3-1 after 8 games. But Elway and the team hit its stride, going 6-1 in the last 7 games of the year, with Elway averaging a stellar 8.3 yards per attempt and taking just 11 sacks. Denver's offense finished 4th in points per game, and its defense ranked 7th. Once again, the team won the AFC West and had a first-round bye, but unlike 1986, they had home field advantage all throughout the playoffs, just barely eking out the honor over their good friends, the Cleveland Browns. Denver's journey back to the Super Bowl began with a showdown versus the talented but mercurial Houston Oilers, led by future Hall of Fame quarterback Warren Moon. It was a laugher as Elway and Denver dominated to the tune of a 34-10 win to reach their second straight AFC Championship game, which happened to once again come against the Browns, but this time it would be in Mile High. Elway had one of the best games of his career, starting the game off with a touchdown to put Denver up 7-0. In fact, Denver went up 21-3 at halftime, and everybody assumed it would be a repeat of the previous week's game versus Houston, but things turned when Elway threw an interception, which set up a Bernie Kosar touchdown pass, but Elway responded with a Tom Brady-esque 80-yard yak-filled touchdown to put Denver back up 28-10. Cleveland would not go away, though, as Ernest Biner scored back-to-back touchdowns to make it a 28-24 game. Gosh, there's surely no way he can be blamed if Cleveland loses, right? Denver kicked a field goal to go up 7 entering the fourth quarter, but famous drunk driver Kosar responded with another touchdown pass to tie the game at 31. Then Tom Elway threw another check-down touchdown pass to put Denver up 38-31, and the roles were reversed from the year before. Much like Elway in 86, Kosar led Cleveland down the field as time was winding down to tie the game, but our good friend Ernest committed the fumble, as it's known, right as it looked like he was walking in for the tying score. This all but effectively ended the game, which ended in a 38-33 Denver win to send them back to the Super Bowl for the second straight year. Elway finished the game with 3 touchdowns and a 114.4 rating, averaging over 10.8 yards per attempt. Denver's opponent in Super Bowl 22 would be the Washington Redskins, a team that had squeaked by Chicago and Minnesota to get there. This had everybody, including the Vegas bettors, fooled, as contrary to the narrative you hear nowadays about Denver being hard luck underdogs, the Broncos were actually favored by 3.5 points heading into this game, and it sure as hell looked like a smart line at first, as Elway began the festivities by firing a 56-yard touchdown pass to go up 7-0, and then even caught a 23-yard pass to help push Denver's lead to 10-0 just 6 minutes into the game. The teams would then exchange several punts entering the second quarter, which would become infamous in Denver for all the wrong reasons. Within the span of 14 minutes, Washington scored 5 touchdowns, including 4 touchdown passes from Doug Williams. Elway also threw a couple interceptions in the quarter, but the game was basically over as Washington had a commanding 35-10 halftime lead. A third Elway interception followed in a scoreless third quarter before Washington scored one more fuck you touchdown run to reach the final score of 42-10. Elway began the game 4 of 5 for 112 yards and a touchdown for a perfect 158.3 rating, but the rest of the game he went just 10 for 33 for 145 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, which equates to a passer rating of 7.7, a number so low Bill Belichick is interested in dating it. For 2 years running now, Elway and Denver had achieved a lot of great things just to get their backs blown out in embarrassing fashion on the biggest stage. No offense to Steve Smith Sr. They were beginning to develop a reputation as big game frauds, fair or not, and people were starting to wonder whether Elway would ever win a ring, which is kind of funny since he was still really young at this point. When you're fresh off of 2 straight ass kickings in the Super Bowl, it's fair to say your team might not be the most energetic, and that's really the story of the 1988 Denver Broncos. They are the forgotten team squeezed into a famous 4-year span where the Broncos reached 3 Super Bowls. Denver finished 8-8 and were outscored by 25 points on the season. They finished 15th in points per game and 20th in points per game allowed. The noticeable thing about this Denver team was just how many horrible blowout losses they had. There was an 18-point loss to the Steelers in a game that Elway missed, a 55-23 drubbing on Halloween night against the Colts, a 42-0 embarrassment versus the Saints in New Orleans, and a pivotal 42-14 loss to the Seahawks Seahawks late in the year. It's bad enough for me to tell you that Elway had more interceptions than touchdowns on the season, but let's dig a little deeper on his inadequacy. 16th in completion percentage, 19th in touchdown percentage, 20th in interception percentage, 21st in yards per attempt, 18th in passer rating, and also 18th in net yards per attempt and adjusted net yards per attempt. How the hell was this guy so bad with so much physical talent and the reputation of an all-time great quarterback? There's just so much of this with Elway, and let's be real, a lot of people give him a massive pass because of Dan Reeves' system being outdated. But at a certain point, the guy touching the ball on every play has to take accountability, in my opinion. Despite Denver's mediocrity and Elway's shittiness individually, the Broncos missed the playoffs by just one game, falling one game behind the Seahawks for a wild card spot. There's a lot of games you could point at for this, like blowing a 24-0 lead at home to the Raiders early in the year, to losing another one-point game on the road versus those same Raiders, where the difference was an 86-yard pick six thrown by Mr. Ed to doom Denver. One of the few bright spots of the season was an overtime win versus the eventual champion 49ers, but that's really all Broncos and Elway fans have to hang their hats on for this season. I will point out, though, that we once again saw Elway really struggle without Mike Shanahan on the coaching staff, which was the case in 1988, as Shanahan left his offensive coordinator position from the year before, where Elway won MVP, to become the head coach for the Raiders. Perhaps Elway was just trying to help out an old friend by giving Shanny 2 wins at Denver's expense. Who knows? Let's move on now, shall we? 1989 saw a return to form for the Denver Broncos, becoming the class of the AFC once again, a conference which saw only one team win double-digit games in 1989. Can you silly gooses guess which team that was? That's right, the Broncos. Wow, you're so smart and you're so beautiful. This level of dominance means John Elway must have had an insane individual season, right? Well, not exactly. If Elway's 1988 season was bad, then his 1989 season was a little less bad, maybe? Let's just say Elway benefited mightily from the first-ranked Wade Phillips-led defense. For the season, Elway finished 20th in completion percentage, 10th in touchdown percentage, 19th in interception percentage, 10th in yards per attempt, 17th in passer rating, 14th in net yards per attempt, and 15th in adjusted net yards per attempt. He had as many touchdowns as interceptions with 18 apiece. I know I keep harping on it, but there's an interesting way to split up Elway's 1989 season if you look hard enough. Over the first 6 games, Elway put up just 5 touchdowns to 8 interceptions for a dreadful 61 passer rating. But, thanks to an elite defense, Denver was still sitting at 5-1. The date of Denver's 6th game in 1989 was October 15th, and can you guess who returned to the Broncos the very next day after a short pit stop with the Raiders? That's right, Mike fucking Shanahan. Over the last 9 games of the year, with Shanahan now back, Elway's numbers improved across the board. I mean, they still weren't historically great or anything, but they were a lot more respectable. He put up 13 touchdowns to 10 interceptions while averaging 7.8 yards per attempt and an 81.5 rating. But despite Elway's individual play improving as the season went on, the Broncos as a team somewhat limped into the playoffs, if there's such a thing for the number 1 seed to do, albeit in an admittedly terrible conference. Denver started the year 10-2 before losing 3 of their last 4 games to finish 11-5. Elway actually did make the Pro Bowl despite his lackluster numbers, which is pretty hilarious because people do seem to love their big, strong-arm passers, don't they? I will say that the Broncos having the best defense in the regular season directly conflicts with the narrative that Elway quote-unquote carried the team to the Super Bowl, as is usually stated. Personally, I don't think Elway carried anything, at least in the regular season in any of those 3 years, but his performance in the AFC playoffs during the span of 1986 to 1989 was very impressive, particularly in 87 and 89. His performance in Super Bowls, though, well, that's another story, but he did show up to get the Broncos there 3 times, although do I think he would have made 3 Super Bowls in the 80s NFC? Absolutely zero fucking chance. And speaking of the playoffs, let's go in depth on the Broncos' 1989 Super Bowl run, shall we? Oh, what's that? You don't want to go in depth, huh? Well, fuck you then. I'm doing it anyway because it's my video and I can do what I want because I am a big, strong, handsome boy. Denver matched up with a 9-7 Pittsburgh team at home in the divisional round, much like what happened in 1984. However, the results this time would be different. Spoiler. Pittsburgh came out whipping Denver belt to ass, going up 10-0 before Denver finally got into the game with a touchdown run, but the Steelers did not blink, as Bubby Brister found our old friend Lewis Lips for another touchdown to go right back up 17-7 in the second quarter. But Pittsburgh kind of blew its load a little bit too early, as Denver would rip off 10 straight points to tie the game at 17 late in the third, but Pittsburgh would take a 3-point lead into the fourth after a field goal. In the fourth quarter, Elway threw an interception, which set up another Pittsburgh field goal to give give them a 23-17 lead, but that was more than enough time for Elway to lead a go-ahead touchdown drive, which ended with Mel Bratton's second 1-yard rushing touchdown of the day to give Denver a 24-23 lead late in the game. The game then ended somewhat anticlimactically as Pittsburgh's future Hall of Fame center Dermontti Dawson had a horrible snap which ended as a fumble recovery for Denver, who then milked the rest of the clock to advance to the AFC Championship game where they would face, you guessed it, Cleveland Browns. The first two Denver-Cleveland AFC Championship game matchups ended up getting fancy names like the drive and the fumble, but the third matchup is largely forgotten about to everybody outside of the two playing team cities. Probably because, unlike the first two games, it was a pretty decisive victory for Denver. Oh, I'm so naughty with these spoilers. Elway had probably the best game of his career, all things considered, throwing for nearly 400 yards and 3 touchdowns for a 120.7 rating in a 37-21 win. Cleveland would actually make it somewhat interesting heading into the fourth quarter, down just 24-21, but the Broncos blanked them and reeled off 13 straight points in the fourth to get back to the Super Bowl. With this win, Elway all but cemented himself as the second most hated person in Cleveland ever, behind Art Modell. Maybe LeBron, but I think most Cleveland fans have forgiven him for 2010 after he came back and won a title. Elway would be back in the Super Bowl again with another chance to silence his critics, but with the way Super Bowl 24 went, I'm sure that Elway would secretly wish he never got back there at all. Super Bowl 24 saw the 49ers enter as 13-point favorites, so yeah, it wasn't as if anybody expected Elway to win, but to lose by 45 points, which is still a record to this day. I don't even think Elway's biggest detractors saw that coming. This game was literally the definition of belt to ass, as San Francisco, really, if we're all being honest, probably could have hung 80 points on Denver, and Joe Montana could have very easily thrown for 8 or 9 touchdown passes if they wanted him to. It was that bad. For as great and nearly flawless as San Francisco was outside of a missed extra point, Elway and Denver were that bad in all aspects. For the third time in 4 years, Denver's defense allowed the opposing quarterback to put up historic numbers on them, but even if San Fran's offense had an off day, they probably still would have won this game. Elway did run for a touchdown when Denver was down by 38 late in the third, aka the Chris Paul meme before memes were even a thing. But that's about the only highlight he or Denver had all day. Elway finished a horrid 10 for 26 for just 108 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a barely legal 19.4 rating, which was bad even by his 1983 to 1992 standards. At this point in time, Elway wasn't even 30 years old yet, but he was now 0-3 in the Super Bowl, with all 3 being decisive blowouts. He was viewed by some as a spoiled brat who didn't have the goods to win it all, which isn't entirely fair, but the only thing he could do at this point to shut people up for good was to win a Super Bowl, a game which he would now not make it back to for almost another decade. Tough scene.